The man who rebuilt Ground Zero is placing his bets on a Hell's Kitchen casino, plus lessons from the fiscal crisis of the 1970s. The Point starts right now. Larry Silverstein had the patience of a saint to overcome the many obstacles in the path to rebuilding Ground Zero, but he's not resting on his laurels. And that's what we're going to talk about first. You actually want to build a casino on the west side. After all the stuff you went through at Ground Zero, you have not lost the taste for building. So you want to build a casino near the Javits Convention Center. Why?
Well, because New York can benefit from the income that the casino will produce. And it's anticipated. The casino is really not meant for people who live in New York. It's meant for people from outside of New York, visitors who will come to New York.
Do you really think visitors are going to be coming with all the turmoil that's happening on Wall Street?
You know, today, no one knows, but tomorrow, hopefully.
So the thing about this is that it's not the only casino bid that's being made. There are lots of casino bids all over the city, in Brooklyn and in Queens,
yes,
and 3 in the same area where you want to bid. There's one in Times Square, there's a proposal, and there's one in Hudson Yards. What makes you think that your proposal near the Javits Center is the one that's going to be the winning bid?
Marcia, I think we've got the best location of the 3 because we're in an area where no one objects. There's nobody to object in the area in which we're located. So there's the bus terminal, mass transit. There's the convention center. It's a location where you don't have objections surfacing from the community in general. So there's so many objections to the other sites. The site that doesn't get any objections is ours, because we're in an area where there's no controversy. There's an area where there are no people around who object to it.
But people would say that Times Square would be a good place to go because people go there as tourists. There's a lot to get them to go to Times Square. Why not Times Square as opposed to your location, which is really on the outskirts of the area?
Well, I think our location is devoid of the masses of people who exist today, who populate the Times Square area. Times Square is just extraordinarily busy, extraordinarily congested. We don't have that congestion problem. We don't have any of that. So our location, I think, is from the standpoint of a location that could work, that no one has any objections to. I think that we're in a very good spot for that.
Does it help that it's near the bus terminal, so people, if they wanted to, could take a bus and go gamble at your casino?
Absolutely.
But also, the other question is this. The city and the state and the Port Authority, your friends at the Port Authority, want to rebuild the Port Authority bus terminal.
Yes.
Will that impede your plans to build a casino in the same area?
I don't believe so much.
Why not?
Well, because they're slightly distant from each other. The bus terminal is 8th Avenue to 9th Avenue. We're between 10th and 11th. So that the immediacy is not that great, but it's close enough for people to utilize the bus terminal and walk over for the gambling.
We have to point out, though, that there are only 3 licenses that are available for downstate. And some people think that the casino in Empire State in Yonkers has a inside track for that, and that the Racino that also exists at Aqueduct has an inside track. So that would mean that there's 1 license and a gazillion bids. How do you feel that you have a better chance than all the other people?
Of all of those, there is 1 casino that's going to be located in Manhattan.
Right.
And we think we have a great shot.
But there's also somebody who wants to build one on the east side near the UN.
Yes, there's mass transit in that location. It's devoid of it. That's the problem. Mass transit is terribly important.
So did you buy this piece of property with the idea of building a casino right there?
Honestly, no. We've had the property for some time.
So, to switch gears for a second, you've written a book. It's called The Rising. I want you to see it. And it is about the trials, tribulations, the good times, the bad times of trying to rebuild on Ground Zero after a horrendous terrorist attack. But first we have to point out that you actually bought the property 6 weeks
before 9/11.
So Did you, when it happened, like, you must have been like crazed?
I was totally shocked, like everybody else was. But having purchased it just 6 weeks prior to 9/11 was a staggering experience.
Well, what went through your head when you saw the towers coming down? Didn't you have offices there at that point?
We were, we were extraordinarily fortunate because I had 2 children on their way to working in the temporary offices on the 90th floor
Oh my
of the
God.
North Tower. And fortunately, this happened. The first building came down, first plane hit the North Tower. It's about 9:15. If it hit at 9 o'clock, it would have been a disaster for me, personal disaster, because I could have lost 2 of my children. As happened, we lost 4 employees of Silverstein Properties with 8 children between them. That was extremely difficult. And then, of course, we had lost almost 3,000 people working in and around the trade center, plus the first responders. That was a horrendous experience. And that's something you could never forget. I could never forget that.
So you wake up the next morning and all of your properties are rubble. Not to mention the fact that it was still on fire and it took months to put the fire out and all the people who had perished. What were your thoughts? Were your thoughts, I'm going to try to rebuild? Were your thoughts, oh my God? What were you thinking?
Marsha, the Governor Pataki, called me, I think, 2 days after 9/11. I think it was about 7 o'clock in the morning, and he called. And he said, Larry, what do you think we ought to do?
And you said?
And I said, Governor, the World Trade Center was the locomotive for all of the commercial activity in Lower Manhattan. I said, if we don't rebuild that, Lower Manhattan is going to fade away. I said, it's got 12 mass transit lines feeding it. There was so much dynamic activity in Lower Manhattan, particularly in the world of finance. I said, I really think it's got to get rebuilt. And the sooner we do it, the better it is.
Did you have any doubts that you could do it?
It didn't occur to me. I didn't think about that.
But
I just knew it had to be rebuilt.
It was a years-long and very difficult project.
Well, it's only taken me 23 years.
But the thing about it is that, did you ever have doubts? I mean, you had to deal with a series of mayors, a series of governors, insurmountable hurdles. What was the most difficult part of it?
I think the most difficult part was the 5 years of litigation with 22 insurance companies who decided they didn't want to pay 5 cents of their obligations to me in terms of what I was entitled to.
Did you ever end up getting the money back that you had to use to fight the insurance companies?
We got some monies that we had to use to fight them, no. But at the end of day, what we received from the insurance companies was about $4.3 billion. As it turns out, we've spent far, far more than that in rebuilding the Trade Center.
Do you think it was an economically beneficial thing to do for the Silverstein Company?
I wouldn't, I never thought about the economics. What I did think about was the necessity of getting it rebuilt. And I dedicated myself to doing exactly that. But I also tell you, Marsha, I never believed it would take 20 years or 23 years to do it.
Did you believe you'd be able to do it?
I'm sorry?
Did you believe you'd be able to do it?
I felt I had an obligation to do it. In the lease that I signed, I was 71 years of age when I signed a 100-year lease with the Port Authority.
So when you're in your office and you look out over what is now a totally rebuilt area, what's your feeling?
I have a sense of tremendous pride. As I look down, I say to myself, and I look at it every day because we live there, and so it strikes me as if we've done a pretty good job at rebuilding. It gives me a feeling of satisfaction, and so I'm proud of what we've done.
Well, we're going to have to leave it right there for now. But up next, a new movie about an old problem. We talk to the people behind Drop Dead City, New York, on the brink in 1975. Michael Rohatyn and Peter Yost are the directors of Drop Dead City. But I have to ask you, this is a story that happened in 1975. That's 50 years ago. Why did you decide to look at something that happened so long ago? Go ahead, Michael.
Well, Peter and I are old friends and sometimes come home from school together, and he is really a professional in this business of making documentaries, and was sort of at a period where he was at loose ends. He said, what would be a good story? And I had just been talking about this with my ex, and that's how it came about. I said, well, you know, what about that story? Hadn't been done yet. There have been documentaries about so many parts of New York City history, but that one had sort of eluded filmmakers, and we then learned why, which is that it's extremely complicated and difficult, you know.
What was the most difficult thing about doing it?
I think getting the kind of balance between the accounting kind of wonky stuff of like the procedural part, the unions and the contracts and the different forces and the dynamics between federal and, you know, the technical stuff, and then having it be alive, having it have the character of New York in it, and honoring our interviewers, the people that we interviewed. Many have passed away, but that we adored, and so it was hard to get that straight.
Peter, what was the most difficult part for you?
I think, just seconding what Michael said, the complexity of the story, but not wanting to be bogged down in that. To do justice to how important this was, your question about why after 50 years, again, just adding to that, I think it's incredibly relevant today. It might seem like ancient history, but the same issues that the city and the country was wrestling with in the film about what does a government owe its people? Should the federal government help raise people up, or should people be left alone on their own? These are things that we're seeing playing out right now, and even just in these days, these weeks, with the current presidency, the antagonism between the federal government and certainly New York City directly, New York State, but the city, is the same thing.
So to your point, there was great antagonism between then President Gerald Ford and New York City, and we're going to listen to just how antagonistic it was. Let's take a listen.
Responsibility for New York City's financial problems is being left on the front doorstep of the federal government, unwanted and abandoned by its real parents. I can tell you, and tell you now, that I am prepared to veto any bill that has as its purpose a federal bailout of New York City to prevent a default.
Now, that was an iconic front page of the New York Daily News. Ford to City, drop dead. But what role did that headline have in getting people in New York to come together, to join together, disparate groups of people to come together to try to save New York when it was obvious that there was going to be no help from Washington?
I think it's one of the great examples of unintended consequences, that they thought they were going to just make an important ideological point and let New York kind of go down, and it brought New Yorkers together, you know, in an unbelievably kind of powerful way. It is iconic for a good reason. It's just, as every headline is, it's a pithy kind of statement of the circumstance. It's not word for word what he said, and he kind of talked about that later in life, that he was a little bitter that he had been misquoted, but their headlines aren't known for perfect, you know, transmission of quotes, but the sentiment was 100% accurate, and it did bring New Yorkers together.
How did you think it galvanized the city?
I think it was a visceral, immediate moment. We have shots in the film just after that clip and we saw those guys in the bar kind of smoking their cigars back when you could do such a thing, and they were just horrified and shocked. And we have clips of people, just man on the street, person on the street interviews of just, that's it, this is going to cost, and one woman actually says, this is going to cost him a lot of votes, him being Ford. And in fact, soon after there was the presidential election, New York, which at the time could have swung either way, swung in the Democrat column.
And for Jimmy Carter.
For Jimmy Carter. And those votes, one could argue, and that headline, one could argue, significantly might well have cost him the presidency and put Carter in office.
The great thing for me also about that headline is it's the Daily News. It was the way that New Yorkers kind of understood what was going on in their own community, their own environment. You know, 3 editions, 4 editions a day. I love that we could hinge that whole story around that. We have a lot of New York Times we have some wonderful journalists from all different parts of journalism, but the news, Daily News to me, belongs in that spot.
Well, people don't realize that at the time, the Daily News was the biggest circulation paper in the country. It had a circulation of, believe it or not, 3 million, which is like, you know, when you look at the Daily News today, it's a mere shadow of itself,
yeah,
and
right.
most of it is done, you know, online.
Right.
But at the time, you know, it had editions that came out the night before, and it went all through the night, and it was updated 4 or 5 times before the final editions hit the street.
Amazing.
And it did play an important role in the life of the city at that time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And
yeah.
some of your viewers might know, but in that clip, the speech that Ford gave was actually originally written by David Gergen.
And he says that he didn't think he was going to give that speech in your movie.
Exactly. Right. And he wrote a very hardline speech, and he expected Ford's people to water it down and soften it and make it a little more
So why do you
palatable.
think they didn't do that?
I think one argument that we put forth in the movie, it's somewhat speculative, but I think there's some evidence to this. Ford was surrounded by a bunch of conservative Midwesterners, including Rumsfeld and Cheney,
who had no love for New York City.
Absolutely hated New York City and hated the quote-unquote liberal ideal that it embodied. And so they were whispering in his ear, and I wasn't in the room, I don't know, but arguably, I'm sure they had a finger on that scale.
Well, they didn't like East Coast liberalism.
Right. They didn't like Nelson Rockefeller.
Well, he was a Republican, but
right. Even he was too much.
Too liberal.
Exactly. It was sort of the beginning of turning to the center states for the GOP, and sort of the elites, leaving the elites on the coast. I think it was partly that.
But as you point out in your movie, what this did is it brought politicians, unions, money managers like your dad, and others to come together to try to find some kind of a solution.
Right. And I feel like what's great about the story is this is in many ways a very disputatious city, and this was very raw times in New York City, and to leave the city to sort this out for itself was probably a calculated bet on the part of the White House to think like they'll never get this figured out. And we did. The city did, the state did. Hugh Carey is an immense character in our movie for his statesmanship of, you know, bringing Albany around. There's a lot of, you know, kind of dissent between Albany and New York City. And then to kind of shape this kind of grand bargain between the banks and the unions buying bonds, and the banks forgiving debt, and the federal government then only if those other things were achieved, the federal government would come in. And I think that, you know, for my father, that was kind of the great accomplishment, was to have built that thing, to have it work. Very different personalities to bring to the table. And he was able to speak to everybody in a way that they trusted him and related to him. And I think that was his achievement.
Well, we're going to have to leave it right there for now, but our conversations continue right after the show on our streaming channel, CBS News New York. Thank you for joining me. A global tariff war could impact one of New York's key industries, tourism. Do New Yorkers think it will survive the upheaval? They're weighing in on your point. Why do you think tourists come to New York City?
It's the most exciting city there is.
Because it's the capital of the world.
There's nothing like New York.
They just love it.
Because it's the greatest city in the world, in the country, at least.
It's got everything. It's got theater, it's got music.
Lots of museums, you know, parks.
Food, attractions.
Because of this.
Because of what?
There's nothing else in the world like this, period, the end.
There's so many different things to do that it's incredible. You compare it to other cities.
I just got off the train with some students from Paris, and they love it. I love it.
Best food, best people, best subways. I can't say the fourth one.
Go ahead, say it.
Maybe not the best mayor.
Do you think that the president's policies are going to keep people from coming to the city?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
Definitely.
Oh, I have no idea.
Probably.
I think they might.
In what way?
Affect everybody's life. People are going to be afraid to do anything and not have any more money.
Foreign tourists, they may feel soured on coming to the States and spending money here.
People have, expressed a lot of negative feelings about the country now, so I'm sure that'll have a big effect.
In Canada, it has, the tourist rate has decreased. 23% have canceled their reservations.
Wow.
Yes, and one of my best friends live in Canada, and they're very outraged what's going on.
That's the least of the disaster that we're facing, so probably.
Why should people come to New York City?
Because we're the greatest city in the world, Marcia.
Just see different people, experience different things.
It sounds funny, but the people are the best.
There's just no place like New York.
You come for the energy and for the people and to have fun and to get away from your, everyday life.
Because it's New York.
Do you think people are going to continue to come?
I hope so. I hope so.
I don't think so.
Probably some.
1,000,000%.
I think some will. A lot of people have already planned their vacations.
We'll see, but I think it's going to tail off. Certainly Canadians will stop coming.
Yes, but not as many, I don't think. But yeah, people will always come.
Do you think people will continue to come?
I think people will continue to come. I think this will all work out in the end, one way or the other.